The grand conclave of the Silveran Ascendancy did not shout. They resonated. In the vaulted, crystalline dome of the High Synod, situated atop the highest spire of the capital world of Elara, the air shimmered with the low-frequency hum of displeasure. It was a sound felt in the marrow of one's bones rather than heard, a collective psionic pressure exerted by the 50 eldest matriarchs and patriarchs of the Empire. Outside the transparent walls, the binary suns of the system were setting, casting long, bruised shadows of violet and burnt orange across the Silver City, a visual metaphor that High Counselor Valen found entirely too apt for the current political climate. The war against the Authari Dominion was not going well. It was not a collapse, not yet, but a slow, grinding erosion of borders and morale, a bleeding out of resources that the aesthetic-obsessed Silveran were ill-equipped to staunch. They were a people of light, of art, of elegant energy shielding and sleek needle-like vessels designed for speed and grace. The Authari were brutes of heavy kinetic iron and nuclear fire, unconcerned with the beauty of the void. And now, into this delicate, crumbling equation, the Terrans had inserted themselves, a species so new to the galactic stage, so biologically unremarkable and technologically crude, that their request for an alliance had been met not with hope, but with derisive charity. Valen stood at the center of the obsidian floor, his long, slender fingers clasped within the sleeves of his iridescent robes. He kept his multifaceted eyes lowered, respecting the hierarchy, though his mind churned with a frustration that bordered on heresy. The Archon, a towering figure whose carapace was inlaid with gold filigree, sat upon the floating throne, looking down with a mixture of boredom and irritation. The topic at hand was the Human Project, a diplomatic footnote that had suddenly spiraled into a bureaucratic absurdity. Months ago, the Terran delegation had requested a single vessel, not to keep, but to refit. They claimed their own ships were too small for the heavy reactors required for line combat, and they wished to demonstrate their engineering philosophy on a Silveran hull. It was a laughable proposition. Silveran ships were grown as much as they were built, sung into existence by harmonics and nano-weaving. What could apes with wrenches do to such art? Yet in a gesture of dismissive irony, the Council had granted them the Dawn's fragile light. It was a decommissioned hauler, a logistical drift barge used for transporting waste and ore, scheduled for reclamation. It was slow, unshielded, and structurally the weakest classification in the entire fleet. It was a joke, a gift of garbage to the scavengers. "They have returned," the Archon's voice boomed, amplified by the acoustics of the chamber. "The primates have returned our refuse, and I am told they have renamed it." A ripple of amusement, sounding like dry leaves skittering on stone, passed through the assembled counselors. "They call it the Blackened Farewell Oath." The name hung in the air, discordant and heavy. It lacked the poetic lilt of Silveran nomenclature. It sounded like a stone dropping into a deep well. Valen shifted his weight. He had been the one to sign the transfer papers, the one forced to deal with the Terran admiral, a woman named Vance who possessed eyes as flat and hard as polished flint. He remembered her lack of gratitude. When he had offered the Dawn's fragile light, she had not looked insulted. She had looked at the hull schematics with a terrifying, predatory calculation. She had not seen a garbage scow, she had seen a canvas. "Where is this vessel?" asked Counselor Myrix, a bloated bureaucrat responsible for naval logistics. "I assume they have bolted crude projectile cannons to the hull and painted it red to signify aggression." "It is holding position at the edge of the gravity well," Valen spoke up, his voice steady despite the pressure in the room. "However, the orbital traffic controllers are reporting anomalies." The Archon leaned forward, the gold filigree catching the dying light of the suns. "Anomalies? Have they broken the navigation drive? Do we need to tow it to the scrapyard?" Valen consulted the data slate hovering near his wrist. "No, Your Eminence, the anomaly is that the sensors cannot see it, not clearly. It registers as a gravitational void, a hole in the scan. Traffic control only confirmed its presence because it blocked the starlight from the background constellations." Silence descended upon the chamber. The amusement evaporated. In the highly advanced warfare of the Ascendancy, stealth was achieved through refraction and light-bending, cloaking fields that shimmered like heat haze. To simply absorb scans, to exist as a negation of data, was a concept that felt primitive yet profoundly unsettling. "Bring it up on the main viewer," the Archon commanded, his tone sharpening. "Let us see what the primitives have done to our property." The central hololith dissolved the map of the sector and reconstituted the image from the deep range orbital cameras. The room gasped. It was a sound of genuine shock, stripping away the veneer of diplomatic composure. The ship that hung in the void was no longer the bulbous, pale-white ovoid of the Dawn's fragile light. It had been flayed. The graceful curves were gone, replaced by angular, brutalist geometry. The hull was not white. It was a matte, abyssal black that seemed to drink the light of the stars around it. It looked like a shard of obsidian carved by a madman. The surface was pitted and scarred, not from damage but from texture, layer upon layer of ablative plating that looked like hardened volcanic rock. It was ugly. It was hideous in a way that bypassed aesthetics and struck directly at the primal hindbrain, triggering a fear of predators lurking in the dark. But it was the size that confused them. The humans had expanded the superstructure, extending the length by nearly 30%, adding massive, blocky protrusions along the flanks that resembled the ribs of a starving beast. There were no glowing engine ports, no elegant fins. It sat in the darkness like a brooding monolith, silent and terrifyingly still. "What is that?" Myrix whispered, his bioluminescent patches dimming in distress. "That is an abomination. It is a desecration of the builder's art." Valen stared at the image, unable to look away. He saw something the others did not. He saw purpose. The Sylvan built ships to flow through space. This thing was built to dominate it. It looked heavy. It looked as though it possessed its own gravity, dragging the universe down to its level. "They request permission to dock," Valen said, reading the incoming transmission. "Admiral Vance is aboard. She wishes to present the upgrade to the Council formally." The Archon hesitated. The arrogance was still there, but it was now tempered by a cold trickle of uncertainty. This was not the work of children playing with toys. This was the work of something else, something the Sylvan had perhaps underestimated in their pursuit of enlightenment. "Let them land," the Archon said finally, waving a hand as if to dismiss a foul odor. "But bring them here under guard, and have the reclamation crews ready to dismantle that monstrosity the moment the humans are gone. I will not have such ugliness polluting our sky." The landing of the blackened farewell oath was an event that defied standard procedure. Usually, Sylvan ships utilized anti-gravity repulsors to descend silently, like feathers. The human-modified vessel did not drift. It descended with a roar that shook the foundations of the spaceport, its engines, if they could be called that, emitting a low-frequency thrum that shattered windows in the lower districts. It did not use standard repulsors. It seemed to be manipulating the mass of the planet itself to slow its descent, a crude but effective mastery of physics that set the atmospheric alarms screaming. When it finally settled on the landing pad, the ferrocrete groaned under the weight. The landing struts were massive hydraulic claws that dug into the ground, anchoring the ship as if it expected a hurricane. Steam and coolant vented from side ports, creating a thick artificial fog around the base of the vessel. From this mist, the humans emerged. They did not wear the bright silken ceremonial robes of the Sylvan. They wore uniforms of charcoal gray and deep navy, adorned with simple, unpolished metal insignias. Admiral Vance led them, her gait measured, her face unreadable. Beside her walked a man who looked less like a soldier and more like a mechanic who had seen the inside of a reactor core and lived, his hands stained with oil that no sonic cleanser could remove. This was Chief Engineer Kale. The walk to the council chamber was long and silent. The Sylvan guards, tall and lithe with their energy pikes, towered over the humans, yet the humans did not seem small. They walked with a density of presence, a solidity that made the guards unconsciously give them a wider berth. When they entered the synod, the council was waiting, arranged in a semicircle of judgment. Valen watched them enter, studying their micro-expressions. There was no fear, no awe at the grandeur of the crystal dome. They looked at the High Council as one might look at a weather pattern, something to be navigated, not worshipped. "Admiral Vance," the Archon greeted, his voice dripping with condescension. "You have returned, and you have ruined a perfectly functional transport barge." Vance stopped in the center of the room. She did not bow. She merely nodded, a curt military gesture. "We have optimized it, High Archon. We understood the request was to demonstrate our value to the war effort." "A transport barge has no value on the line. The blackened farewell oath does." "The name itself is an insult, Counselor Myrix SB. It sounds morbid, defeatist. Why farewell? Do you plan to flee in it?" Vance's eyes shifted to Myrix, cold and sharp. "It is a farewell oath because it is designed to be the last ship leaving a system. It is designed to hold the line so others may retreat or to ensure the enemy does not leave at all. It is a promise to the fallen. We do not name our warships after flowers or winds, Counselor. We name them after the burdens they must carry." The silence that followed was uncomfortable. The Sylvan did not think of war as a burden. They thought of it as a regrettable necessity to be conducted with speed and elegance. The concept of holding the line until death was foreign to their doctrine of fluid retreat and ambush. "You speak of optimization," Valen interjected, trying to bridge the cultural gap before the Archon lost his temper. Explain the exterior. You have removed the photonic shielding emitters. You have covered the hull in stone. Composite ablation armor, the engineer Kale spoke up. His voice was gravelly, a stark contrast to the musical tones of the Sylvan. Your photonic shields are elegant, yes. They deflect 99% of energy weapons, but the Athari use mass drivers. They use solid slugs of depleted uranium accelerated to a fraction of light speed. Your shields shatter under kinetic impact. We have seen the reports. You lose 3 frigates for every Athari cruiser because you rely on not getting hit. We assume we will get hit. He gestured to the hololith, which still displayed the ominous black ship. That armor is 3 meters thick. Beneath it is a honeycombed lattice of self-sealing nanogels. Beneath that is a secondary hull of hyperdense alloy. You can pound that ship with railguns for a week and it will not buckle. It absorbs the energy. It deadens the shock. It is not designed to avoid the blow. It is designed to break the fist that strikes it. The Archon laughed, a high, trilling sound. You have built a rock, a slow, blind rock. How do you intend to fight? You have no speed. The Athari will simply fly around you. Vance stepped forward, her demeanor changing slightly, the predator emerging from the diplomat. Speed is relevant only if you need to chase. We do not intend to chase. We intend to be the object in the room that cannot be ignored. We have installed a gravity well generator in the core. The counselors froze. Gravity manipulation was theoretically possible, but the energy requirements were astronomical. It was technology reserved for terraforming, not combat. Impossible, the Archon scoffed. The dawn's fragile light could barely power a sublight drive. Where would you get the energy? We removed the life support for the luxury suites, Kale said matter-of-factly. We removed the artificial gravity plating in the corridors. The crew wears magnetic boots. We gutted the recycling plants, the entertainment grid, and the secondary sensor array. We stripped the ship to its bones and filled the empty space with capacitors. And then, he paused, looking at Vance. Then we installed the singularity trap. The term meant nothing to the Sylvan, but the way Kale said it sent a shiver through Valen. We invite the High Counselor, Vance said, nodding at Valen, to inspect the vessel. Theoretical debate is inefficient. Let us show you what humanity offers. The Archon waved a hand dismissively. Go, Valen, humor them. Report back on how quickly we can scrap it. The shuttle ride back to the ship was silent, but the atmosphere had shifted. Valen looked at the humans with new scrutiny. They were not bragging. They were stating facts with the calmness of people who had checked the math 1,000 times. When they docked with the blackened farewell oath, the difference was immediate. The airlock did not hiss with the scented oxygen of a Sylvan ship. It cycled with a harsh, mechanical clank. The air inside smelled of ozone, recycled sweat, and hot metal. It was cold. Valen's robes offered little protection against the chill. We run the ambient temperature low, Vance explained, noticing his discomfort. Keeps the cogitators cool and the crew alert. Heat is waste. They walked down the main corridor. It was unrecognizable. The smooth, white curves were gone, replaced by exposed conduit, heavy bulkheads, and steel grating. There were no lights, only dim red emergency strips running along the floor. Why is it so dark? Valen asked, his eyes struggling to adjust. The Sylvan spectrum relies on high luminosity. The Athari target power signatures, Vance replied. We run silent, we run dark, and if the hull is breached, we don't want to be blinded by sparking circuits. Red light preserves night vision. They passed crew members, humans and a few allied species, who moved with frantic, disciplined purpose. They wore heavy exosuits, magnetized to the floor. Valen realized with a start that there was no artificial gravity. He was floating, held down only by the magneti. Sea souls the humans had provided him. It was disorienting, nauseating. To the Sylvan, comfort was a prerequisite for competence. To these humans, comfort was a weakness. They reached the bridge or what passed for it. It was a bunker. Buried deep in the center of the ship, not exposed on the hull like a Sylvan command deck, it was a spherical room lined with screens. There were no windows. You fly, blind? Valen asked, horrified. Windows are structural weaknesses, Vance said, taking her seat at the center station. Sensors and cameras give us a 360-degree view without the risk of being sucked into the void. Show him, Vance ordered. Kale tapped a console. The main screen flickered to life, showing the star field. The gravity well, Kale narrated. We don't just generate a field, we anchor it. We turn this ship into a localized supermassive object. Effectively, we become a small planet for tactical purposes. He pressed a sequence of keys. A low groan echoed through the ship, a sound of metal under extreme stress. Valen felt his stomach drop. On the sensors, he watched as debris floating kilometers away suddenly stopped its drift and began to pull toward the ship. We can pull enemy fighters out of formation, Vance said. We can bend the trajectory of their kinetic slugs. They don't have to hit us. We make them miss by bending the space they travel through. And if they get too close, she signaled Kale. The hum intensified. We discharge the capacitors into the hull plating. Anything touching us is vaporized. Anything near us is cooked by radiation. Valen was silent. It was barbaric. It was a strategy of attrition, of enduring pain to inflict greater pain. This is suicide, he whispered. You sit in the dark, drawing fire, absorbing damage, waiting for them to break. Vance turned her chair to face him. Her face was grim, illuminated by the red tactical lights. Counselor, you have been losing this war because you try to outfly a storm. You cannot outfly the Athari. They are a tide. The only way to stop a tide is to be a rock. A rock does not care if it is chipped. A rock does not care if it is ugly. It endures. That is what humanity brings to the Alliance. We are the shield you are too proud to carry. The philosophical debate was cut short by the wailing of a siren. It was not a drill. The lights on the bridge shifted from steady red to pulsing crimson. Contact, a sensor officer shouted. Hyperspace rupture detected, massive signatures, Sector 4. Valen froze. The Athari here, but the fleet is 3 systems away. Vance didn't flinch. They bypassed the front lines, a decapitation strike. They're coming for the Council. Valen's heart raced. The capital was defenseless. The ceremonial guard ships were light frigates, useless against a heavy assault. We must flee, Valen panicked. Get the Archon to the shuttle. Vance ignored him. Helm, bring us about. Intercept course. Engineer Kale, charge the well. All hands battle stations. You cannot engage them, Valen shouted. This is a transport barge. There are 3 Athari dreadnoughts exiting the rift. Vance looked at him, and for the first time he saw a ghost of a smile. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a wolf that had trapped a bear. Then it is a target-rich environment. Counselor, strap in. You are about to see why we call it the farewell oath. The ship shuddered as the main thrusters fired. Unlike the elegant Silveran engines, these burned with dirty fusion fire, propelling the massive black slab of metal directly into the path of the incoming enemy fleet. On the screen, the Athari ships emerged from hyperspace, monstrous, spiked vessels bristling with railguns. They were designed to kill quickly. They saw the blackened farewell oath and predictably ignored it. It read as debris, a dead hull. They aimed their weapons at the city below. They are targeting the Synod, Valen gasped. They will glass the city. Not today, Vance said softly. Kale dropped the anchor. Kale slammed a lever forward. The universe seemed to lurch. Valen felt his weight double, then triple. The ship groaned, the sound of a submarine diving past its crushed depth. Outside, the effect was cataclysmic. The Athari dreadnoughts, moving at attack velocity, suddenly veered off course. Their bows dipped, pulled inexorably toward the small, black ship that sat in their path. The kinetic rounds they had fired at the city curved wildly, dragged by the sudden gravitational anomaly, smashing harmlessly into the Oath's ablative armor or spiraling off into deep space. The Athari formation broke. Confusion reigned. They had expected a city, not a gravity sink. They're turning on us, the tactical officer reported, locking all weapons on our signature. Good, Vance said. Let them look at us. The Athari fleet opened fire. The void lit up with thousands of tracer rounds, missiles, and high-velocity slugs. Valen squeezed his eyes shut, waiting. G for vaporization. The impacts came not as explosions, but as dull, heavy thuds that vibrated through the magnetic boots and up his spine. Thud, thud, crack. The ship shook violently, but it did not break apart. Armor integrity at 90%, Kale called out. Ablative layers holding, they're scratching the paint. Valen opened his eyes. The screen showed the ship surrounded by a storm of fire, yet the black hull remained, chipped and glowing with heat but whole. The human ship was absorbing an amount of punishment that would have obliterated the entire Silveran fleet. It was taking the beating for the planet. They are closing to ramming distance, the tactical officer warned. They want to crush us. Wait for it, Vance said, her hand hovering over a covered switch on her armrest. Admiral, Kale warned. Capacitors are at 110%. The core is unstable. Wait for it, she repeated. The lead Athari dreadnought, a leviathan of iron, loomed on the screen, filling the view. It was going to ram them. It was going to drive them into the atmosphere. Valen watched death approach. Now, Vance shouted, flipping the cover and slamming the switch. Activate the farewell protocol. Valen expected a weapon to fire. He expected a nuclear detonation. He did not expect the ship to scream. The blackened farewell oath released a pulse. It was not just electromagnetic, it was a harmonic resonance broadcast on every frequency channeled through the gravity drive. It was a digital scream, a massive dump of data, static, and feedback loops that overloaded the local spectrum. But physically, the gravity well inverted. For a microsecond, the ship pushed instead of pulled. The repulsion force was absolute. The Athari dreadnought, massive as it was, hit a wall of pure force. The kinetic energy of its own charge was reflected back into its frame. The front third of the enemy ship crumpled like tin foil. The shockwave shattered its spine. It drifted away, dead in space, leaking atmosphere and debris. Simultaneously, the pulse fried the targeting computers of the other two ships. They were blinded, their sensors overwhelmed by the noise the human ship was emitting. "We have them stunned," Vance said, sweat beading on her forehead. "Weapon systems fire the kinetic spikes." From the jagged ribs of the Oath, seemingly crude metal rods were launched. They had no warheads. They were solid tungsten telephone poles accelerated by magnetic rails. At this close range, against unshielded, blinded targets, they were devastating. They punched through the Athari armor like needles through fabric, venting reactors and shattering bridges. It was over in minutes. The Athari fleet, confused, broken, and leaderless, began to retreat, limping back to the jump point. The blackened farewell Oath sat in the silence of the void, its hull glowing a dull, angry red from the heat of the absorbed damage. It looked like a dying ember. Inside, the bridge was quiet, save for the heavy breathing of the crew and the groaning of cooling metal. Valen unclasped his hands. They were trembling. He looked at Vance. You defeated a dreadnought squadron with a transport barge." Vance slumped slightly in her chair, the adrenaline fading. "We didn't defeat them, Counselor. We outlasted them. That is the human way. We endure until the enemy breaks themselves against us." She looked at the screen at the retreating ships. "But that wasn't the test." Valen blinked. "What? You saved the capital, you saved the council." "That was a skirmish," Kale said, his voice low. He was looking at a secondary monitor, one that was isolated from the main grid. "Admiral, the sensor logs from the battle." The pulse cleared the interference. "We got a clean look at the Athari nav data before they jumped." "And?" Vance asked. "They weren't attacking," Kale said, turning to face them, his face pale beneath the grime. "They were running." The mood on the bridge shifted instantly from relief to a deeper, colder dread. Valen stepped forward. "Running? The Athari are conquerors. They do not run." "They were running from Sector 0, Vance said, looking at the data Kale forwarded to her screen. "The Galactic Rim." "There is nothing there," Valen said. "Only the void between galaxies." "There was nothing there," Vance corrected. "Look at the background radiation." She put the image on the main screen. Behind the retreating Athari fleet, deep in the darkness of intergalactic space, there was a shadow that moved. It was not a ship, it was a cloud of silence that was extinguishing stars as it advanced. The sensor readings were nonsensical, physics breaking down, entropy accelerating a billionfold. "The Athari attacked you because they needed resources," Vance realized, her voice hollow. "They needed a stronghold. They are being hunted." Valen stared at the encroaching shadow. It was massive, spanning light years. It felt ancient. It felt hungry. The petty war between Silverin and the Athari suddenly felt like children squabbling in a sandbox while a tsunami approached. "What is it?" he whispered. "We don't know," Vance said, sitting up straighter. The fatigue vanished, replaced by the steely resolve that Valen had seen in the council chamber. "But we suspected something was out there. The human signals, old probes we sent out centuries ago. They stopped transmitting all at once. That's why we built the Oath." "You built this ship for the Athari?" Valen asked. "No," Vance said, looking at the black, scarred hull of her ship on the diagnostic display. "The Athari are just flesh and blood. You can talk to them or shoot them. She gestured to the shadow. "This is an existential threat. We built the blackened farewell Oath because we knew that one day the galaxy would need a shield that doesn't break. We built it because when the lights go out, someone has to be the last one standing in the dark, holding the torch." She turned to Valen. "Counselor, the war with the Athari is over. You need to call a ceasefire, immediately. We need their ships, we need your technology, and you need our stubbornness." Valen looked at the human. He saw the scars on her face, the grease on the engineer's hands, the ugly, brutalist aesthetic of the ship that had just saved his life. He finally understood. The Silverin sought perfection in form, the humans sought perfection in survival. The Silverin were the flower, the humans were the root, gnarled and buried in the dirt, holding the earth together against the storm. "I will speak to the Archon," Valen said, his voice resonating with a new strength. I will tell him that the art of war has changed. I will tell him that beauty is no longer enough. Good, Vance said. She keyed the comms. Engineering, get me damage control. I want that hull patched within the hour. And Kale, start the designs for the fleet. Fleet? Kale asked, raising an eyebrow. One ship isn't enough, Vance said, staring into the abyss of the approaching shadow. We're going to need 1,000 oaths. We're going to need a wall, and we're going to make sure that whatever comes out of that dark breaks its teeth on us. The blackened farewell oath sat in orbit, a scarred black scar against the glittering stars of Elara. It was no longer a joke. It was no longer a transport barge. It was the first stone in a fortress that would span the stars. And as Valen boarded his shuttle to return to the ivory towers of his people, he looked back at the ugly, magnificent ship and felt something he had never felt before, hope, heavy and solid as iron. The universe was dark and full of terrors, but the humans had brought a rock to throw at it. And for the first time in 1,000 years, the Sylvan Ascendancy would have to learn how to get their hands dirty. The silence of the void was deep, but the hum of the human reactor was louder, a defiant, grinding roar that promised, against all odds, that they would not go quietly into that good night. They would stand. They would fight. And if they fell, they would ensure that the farewell was one the universe would never forget. The shuttle detached, and Valen watched the oath recede. He noticed then that the humans had painted something new on the blackened flank, likely during the heat of the repairs. It was not a silvern glyph. It was a crude image stenciled in white spray paint. It was a simple skeletal hand raising a single finger in defiance. Valen did not know the specific cultural significance of the gesture, but the intent was clear enough. It was a message to the shadow in the dark. Come and try. He smiled, a rare, unpracticed expression for a high counselor. Farewell oath, he murmured, testing the words again. They no longer sounded defeatist. They sounded like a threat. And as the stars of Elara turned beneath him, Valen prepared to walk into the council chamber and shatter their world with the truth, knowing that somewhere above, in the cold and the dark, the humans were already welding the plates for the next battle. The war was over. The survival had just begun. Weeks passed, and the galaxy shifted on its axis, not through celestial mechanics, but through the gravity of necessity. The revelation of the shadow, now designated by the Sylvan scholars as the Umbra Eterna, had stripped away the petty bureaucracies of the council. When Valen had presented the sensor data, the silence in the synod had been absolute. There was no mockery of the humans then. The image of the Athari, the Bogai men of the last century, fleeing in abject terror, had done more to unify the ascendancy than 1,000 years of diplomacy. The ceasefire with the Athari was tense, negotiated on a neutral moon, mediated by Admiral Vance. The Athari warlords, massive creatures of chitin and scar tissue, had been humbled. They sat across the table from the slight, soft-fleshed humans and the slender Sylvan, their bravado gone. They had seen the oath take a beating that would have cracked a planetoid. They respected durability. They respected the capability to endure pain. The integration of the fleets began immediately. It was a chaotic, friction-filled process. Sylvan engineers wept at the sight of humans welding heavy ablative armor onto the delicate, sweeping curves of their interceptors. Athari gunners growled at the humans' insistence on fire discipline and tactical retreat. But slowly, a new doctrine emerged. The blackened farewell oath became the template. It was no longer a single ship. It was a classification, the Oath-class dreadnought. The Sylvan provided the power cores and the sensor suites, capable of piercing the stealth of the Umbra. The Athari provided the kinetic weaponry, the massive railguns and plasma lances. And the humans provided the spine. They provided the philosophy of the farewell, the willingness to turn a ship into a tomb if it meant buying the fleet another minute of survival. Valen found himself spending more time on the oath than in the council chamber. He had become the liaison, a bridge between the high-minded philosophy of his people and the grinding pragmatism of the Terrans. He walked the corridors, now bustling with a mix of species. He saw a Sylvan technician teaching an Athari warrior how to calibrate a shield emitter, their languages distinct but their purpose unified. He saw humans sleeping in the hallways, exhausted, their uniforms stained, refusing to leave their posts. The atmosphere on the ship was heavy, oppressive, yet strangely invigorating. It was the atmosphere of a forge. "We are tracking a vanguard," Kale announced one morning, or what passed for morning in the timeless shift cycle of the ship. Valen stood on the bridge, now expanded to accommodate Athari tactical officers. "The shadow is probing the outer rim of the Athari territories, Sector 9. That is an inhabited system," the Authari representative, Warlord Grak, rumbled. His voice sounded like grinding stones. My broodkin are there, a colony of 6 million. We cannot evacuate them in time, Vance said, staring at the map. The red stain of the Umbra was spreading like ink in water. If we jump the fleet there, we reveal our strength too early. We don't know the full scale of the enemy. We cannot leave them to be consumed, Valen argued, his ethical subroutines flaring. To abandon them is to validate the darkness. Vance looked at the map, then at her crew. We don't send the fleet, we send the oath. One ship, Grak scoffed, though there was no malice in it, only disbelief. Against the vanguard of the end. We are the anvil, Vance said. We go there, we draw their fire, we make them think we are the main force. We hold their attention while the evacuation transports clear the system. Then we detonate the farewell protocol and ride the shockwave out. It is a trap, Kale said quietly, for us. It's a farewell oath, Vance corrected. We promised prepare the jump drive. The jump to Sector 9 was rough. The Oath's engines, now boosted by silveran harmonic crystals, tore a hole in spacetime that was violent and unstable. When they reverted to real space, the view was apocalyptic. The system's star was dimming. A massive tendril of the Umbra was coiled around the sun, draining its photosphere like a parasite. The Authari colony world was dark, illuminated only by the fires of orbital bombardment. The enemy ships, if they could be called ships, were geometric nightmares. They were crystalline shards, blacker than black, that moved with impossible jerks, ignoring inertia. They were dissecting the Authari defense grid with surgical beams of antimatter. Broadcast on all frequencies, Vance ordered. Here is the message. This is the Terran Union ship Blackened Farewell Oath. You are trespassing, leave or be broken. It was an absurd threat, a mouse squeaking at a thunderstorm, but it worked. The crystalline shards paused, they turned. The Oath was the only bright thing in the system, its engines burning with defiant fusion fire. They are locking on, the tactical officer shouted. Energy spikes off the charts. They are using weaponized entropy, decay beams. Shields to maximum. Divert power to the ablation layers, Vance commanded. Kale, get the gravity well online. We need to be heavy. The first beam hit the Oath. It didn't explode. It aged the hull. The metal turned gray, flaking away into dust in seconds. Armor layer 1 is gone, Kale yelled. It just evaporated. They're accelerating the half-life of the atoms. Hold together, Vance gritted out. Grak, return fire, kinetic rounds, let's see if they bleed. The Oath unleashed a barrage of Authari railgun fire. The tungsten slugs slammed into the crystalline shards. Unlike the energy weapons of the Silveran, the brute mass of the metal shattered the fragile crystalline structures. 2 of the enemy ships disintegrated. They are brittle. Grak roared in triumph. They are glass. They are glass cannons, Vance noted. High damage, low defense, they rely on fear, keep firing, draw them in. The battle became a brawl. The Oath thrust itself into the center of the enemy formation, a bull in a china shop. It took hits that withered its armor, turning thick plates into rust and dust, but it kept moving. The gravity well churned the space around them, disrupting the delicate targeting arrays of the Umbra ships. Behind them, on the planet, thousands of transport shuttles were launching, fleeing into the jump point on the far side of the system. Evacuation is at 60%, Valen reported, monitoring the comms. We need 10 more minutes. We don't have 10 minutes, Kale said. Structural integrity is at 40%. The entropy beams are eating the frame. The keel is going to snap. Vance looked at the display. The Umbra was reacting, the tendril feeding on the sun detached. A massive central consciousness was turning its gaze toward them. A ship, no, a construct, the size of a moon was emerging from the cloud. It was a perfect sphere of void, a black hole wrapped in a cage of matter. The mothership, Vance whispered. It is charging a main weapon, Kale said, his voice trembling. It's not an entropy beam, it's a reality shear. It's going to delete this sector of space. 10 minutes, Vance repeated. She looked at Valen. Counselor, can you overload the harmonic crystals in the drive core? Valen's eyes widened. That would create a subspace rupture, a localized tear in the universe. It would destroy the ship. It would create a wall, Vance said. A wall of chaotic spacetime that their beam cannot cross. It will buy the transports time to jump. And us, Valen asked. Vance didn't answer. She didn't have to. The bridge crew continued their work. There was no panic. This was the Oath. Do it, Vance said. Valen hesitated only a moment. He saw the dignity in the inevitable. He tapped the sequence into his console. Harmonic resonance increasing, core criticality in 2 minutes. The blackened farewell oath began to shake, not from enemy fire, but from the energy building within its own heart. The hull glowed white-hot. The enemy sphere fired. A beam of pure nothingness raced toward them. "Gravity well to inverse," Vance shouted. "Push the rupture outward." The ship detonated. But it was not a death. It was a transformation. The explosion of the drive core, shaped by the gravity well and the human will, did not scatter the ship. It expanded it. For a brief, glorious moment, the blackened farewell oath became a star of pure, chaotic refusal. The reality shear hit the expanding bubble of subspace rupture and shattered. The energy washed back over the Umbra fleet, blinding them, burning them, pushing them back into the dark. On the far side of the system, the last transport jumped away. The colony was saved. The light faded, the system was silent, the blackened farewell oath was gone. Or so it seemed. In the wreckage of the sector, drifting amidst the dust of the shattered crystalline ships, a large, blackened chunk of metal rotated slowly. It was the bridge module, encased in a sphere of emergency sealant and hardened nanogels. Inside, the lights were dead. The air was freezing, but there was a heartbeat. Valen coughed, the emergency oxygen mask clinging to his face. The red emergency lights flickered on, dim and weak. He looked around. Vance was slumped over her console, blood trickling from her temple, but she was breathing. Kale was checking the life support readout. Grack was unconscious, but his chitin was intact. "Status," Vance croaked, her voice barely a whisper. "We are alive," Kale said, sounding surprised. "The bridge was ejected milliseconds before the rupture. We are drifting, no engines, no comms. We are a pebble in the ocean." Valen looked out of the cracked viewport. The Umbra had retreated. The massive sphere had pulled back, wounded by the subspace tier. They had won. They had held the line. "We are the weakest ship in the fleet," Vance murmured, a faint smile touching her lips as she looked at the devastation they had caused. "Just a piece of debris." "No," Valen said, reaching out to place a hand on her shoulder. "You are the blackened farewell oath, and you have kept your promise." Months later, a salvage fleet arrived. They did not find a wreck. They found a monument. The bridge module had been recovered, towed back to Elara not as scrap, but as a relic. The story of the Battle of Sector 9 had spread. The fear of the Umbra remained, but it was now tempered by a ferocious pride. The alliance was no longer a political convenience. It was a brotherhood forged in fire. The new fleet was launched a year later. It was magnificent. Thousands of ships built with Sylvan grace, Athari power, and human resilience. They were painted black, all of them. And on the prow of the flagship, a massive dreadnought named the Vance S. Promise High Counselor Valen stood next to Admiral Vance, who now walked with a cane, a permanent reminder of the gravity crush. They looked out at the assembled might of the galaxy. "They will come back," Valen said quietly. "Let them," Vance replied. "We upgraded the galaxy. We're not fragile anymore." She tapped the console, and the fleet responded. A million engines lit up the dark, a constellation of defiance. The signal went out into the deep void toward the watching shadows. It was a simple message, broadcast on the loop of the farewell oath. "We are still here, and we are not saying goodbye."